Actor R.H. Thomson grew up in 1950s Ontario, hearing tales about two global conflicts, the First and Second World Wars. His father fought in World War II and returned home, while his father's uncles fought in World War I. Two of them didn't return home. Two died afterward from lung illnesses brought on by the war, and only one of them lived to old age. On his mother's side, three great-uncles lost their lives. As a teen, Thomson read some of the hundreds of letters his great-uncles and distant cousins had sent back from Europe. That began a long-standing fascination with Canada's military and war veterans that continues to inform his work, resulting in a new book. Here to talk about By the Ghost Light, Wars, Memory, and Families is R.H. Thomson. This book has a lot to say about how we remember our war dead. What made you write it?
I guess stories that people told me, talking to people like you, and then you start telling me stories about your dad and your grandfather and your great-grandfather and your grandmother, and hearing all those stories, you kind of get lost in your own family story. And then when you start listening to the stories around you, you go, you know what? This is an ocean of fantastic stories. So because I'm a storyteller, right? That's my profession. I'm an actor. I work in TV and theater. That's all we do is tell stories. So I became pretty cognizant of the power of stories when they're told, when they're distorted, when they're not told. So that's why I wrote the book.
Now, this is an outgrowth of your one-man play, The Lost Boys, based on the 700 wartime letters your five great-uncles sent back home. And you write, many of our remembrance rituals at city halls and cenotaphs have instead contributed to the forgetting. How so?
All the Remembrance Day ceremonies are very honorable, and I'm so glad we're doing them, and absolutely, but they were all written 100 years ago. And though there were ceremonies and imagery and symbols written about a country that existed 100 years ago, and we're a very different country now. So the country that kind of was tidying up after the war in 1919, 1920, we just been through horrendous war. 68,000 Canadians have been killed, 9 million other soldiers. There was a lot of, how do we deal with the loss? Because the populations had never seen that kind of carnage on the battlefields before. So there was a lot of what I call tidying up, in a good name, in remembering, but it was always remembering them, was never remembering them by name, and it was never remembering the messy bits. We tried to find the good bits, but we kind of parked away the messy bits. Well, when you get selective, when you remember wars and you start getting selective about things, it can distort things, and sometimes not in a useful direction.
Is this what you mean when you refer to, say, the politics of remembrance?
Yes. If you're telling a story after war, you're telling it from a point of view. The old adage is only the victors write the histories. Okay, that's the adage. Well, there's a lot of truth in it. So those people who write the story, and I say that's as a storyteller, right? When I would do a TV or a film or a theater or something, I did Bard on the Beach in Vancouver. I had a great time. But we are the storytellers. So you have to be cognizant that when you're telling a story after the war, is it serving a purpose? To whose agenda is it working? And in case of World War I, it was a pretty narrow agenda, some people would say biased, to clean up a really awful conflict that had no reason to be fought in the first place and killed 9.5 million, well, 15 when you add in the civilians. And at the end of World War I, the armies ended back exactly where they began and had killed 15 million people while doing that. So you kind of put away the messy questions like why, who is responsible, and you go into a kind of an honorable remembrance. Well, it's time to do different. When you
say honorable but repetitive and perpetuating the previous century's worldview, how do we bring our remembrances up to date, up to 2023?
I'm not really the person to tell you that, because I wasn't a combat veteran. And I don't think the remembrances should be made up by civilians or by politicians. I think the remembrances of conflict should be the business of those who've been in combat. And I mean a combat veteran, because they have a view on war and the purpose of it and the use of it that none of the civilians have. But I would only offer this: that the country that Canada was in 1919, we thought ourselves primarily white, primarily English. Oh yeah, they were the French, they were the problem. But it was primarily very British oriented, and oh yeah, there were those Chinese people, the Chinese head tax. We'll try to keep them out. And then there's the Komagata Maru incident in Vancouver, the Victoria, and the ships arrived from the Punjab. No, we don't want them. So we thought of ourselves as very British, very empire. Well, we're a very different country now because we're everybody. So on Remembrance Day, do you leave out the Punjabi Canadians? Do you leave out the Pakistani Canadians, the Nigerian Canadians, the Italian Canadians, Ukrainian Canadians, the Chinese Canadians, the indigenous? Do you leave them out? I say no. So on Remembrance Day, we have to find a way to grow and open this remembrance. So we talk about all wars from all points of view. I had one woman come up. We did a big display in Toronto. I never got a display of the World Remembers going in Vancouver, and it was my eternal regret. I came close to getting on the legislature in Victoria, but they wouldn't give me the money at the end. And well, there you go. But I did it in Toronto, and we had a big screen on the front of Old City Hall. We projected for a month. I put projectors across the street in the Hudson's Bay Company, and I think we were showing 13,000 names a night. And families could find out when their family's name would appear. And afterwards, a woman came up to me and she said, you know, that's the first time I've ever felt included on November the 11th. I said, what do you mean? She said, no, my family and I, we go quiet November the 11th. I said, why? She said, well, I was born in Canada, but my family came out from Germany. So every November the 11th, my family just went quiet. I don't think it's no longer appropriate. And I want the Punjabi Canadian kids to say, well, wait a minute, there were 74,000 young men from India, Pakistan, Punjab killed in World War I. I want to go and look for my great-grandfather's name. So that's what I'm talking about, remembrance, to open it up that way.
Well, let's talk about that a bit. Your project, The World Remembers, where you aim to name all the war dead from World War I, as mentioned, both victor and vanquished, some 9.5 million names. And as you say in the book, the act of naming seems to summon the life of the person named. Now, this has taken you to a number of world capitals. What has the reception been like for The World Remembers?
In Canada or abroad?
Everywhere.
It's interesting. Some people are very, very interested. They go, of course, we should name them. We should actually name them, Bill and John and Sanjay and Peter. We should name them. Other people are strangely indifferent to it. And which is a question that drives me at the bottom of the project. Why do we love the men and women who put on a uniform and go fight for us? But when they come home, we don't really care. We care a bit more now, but we don't really take care of them. Well, I think too with the memory of war. So a lot of people go, oh yeah, you're naming them, so what? But other people will go and, like the woman saw her name on, and there was another family came to the National War Memorial. They brought their kids up at 4:00 in the morning. They drove up from Peterborough because they knew their grandfather's name would be there. And that acknowledged them and their story. So the act of naming the 9.5 million, we've only got 4 million so far. It's only taken 10 years to get that far, is to reach out to everyone and say, let's make an inclusive history, an inclusive remembrance. And I believe in the seeds of that, you start to de-escalate conflict. So I have 23 nations now, a lot of work, whatever. I need help because I don't get any funding from banks or governments. It's just individuals are saying, I want this to happen. And we're working on the Romanian names now, the Polish names, and the Croatian names. And that takes a lot of work, and I got to hire people to do that. So there is a website, so people can go to the website and you can search for your family name on the website. You can go in, what army? Oh, British Army. Oh, what year was he killed? And you can look through those names. So that's the game. It's going at the Canadian War Museum right now because they're now a partner. So they show the display every November. And I've got it in an American museum as well. So it's a way of saying, no more THEM. Let's actually hear the names. And let's tell the families when the name's going to appear. And it is deeply satisfying to many, many people to finally see the acknowledgement of that death.
Where has been the greatest resistance to this project? What's been the greatest difficulty for you to get this thing um, going? As you say, you have 23 Great War nations taking part. You have about half the names that you'd like. What's next then?
Greatest resistance is money. It takes money to do this. So I have to raise it from individuals. Like, and some people give me $50, some people give me $5,000. We're charitable. We give out charitable receipts. There is a slight resistance to, and those who were hanging on to the story, well, the Germans are the enemy, right? We fought them in World War II. This is World War I. This is before the Nazis, before the Holocaust. But there still is, well, they were the enemy. You will dishonor our dead soldiers if you show the name of a former enemy. And that's a story. And that one has to be deconstructed and laid to rest in history, because it's a perpetuate the conflict story. And Germany is now our biggest NATO partner. So why are we not? And I'm not talking World War II, right? We're not talking the Holocaust. We're not talking Nazism. So again, it goes down to the narratives you choose to tell and remember about war.
And this all gets back to, as you referred to earlier, the tidied up bits of our history, the difficult data that tends to get buried, and yet we're still dealing with this more than 100 years after the end of the Great War.
Yep, we're still wanting to spin the history. One guy, I was trying to raise money at the Canadian Club here in Toronto, like in 2014, and this guy looked up from the meeting and said, "Oh yeah, you're one of the guys who believes that everybody's a victim." And that kind of stuff rolls at you. And we had a major problem when a former prime minister of a party, which I will not name, actually pulled our funding at the last minute. And it was bad. It was a disaster. But it was on that they would not relinquish the story that Germans had been the enemies, and therefore you never mention them. So I don't think that's how you reconcile. I don't think that's how you build a better country. A number of diplomats in Belgium, and I can't remember the other, I think Italy, said to me, when I'm trying to say, get in the project, they said to me, "Robert, Canada is the only country who could do this project." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "No other country could come to us and propose to do something that involved everyone." And he was right, only because we're middle power and only because every people is here. So whether I sit down in Serbia or Slovakia or Czech Republic or Russia or Brussels or London, because we're everybody, we have more license to make something so inclusive. And I take that as a compliment to the country we're trying to build now, which I think it's a remarkable country we're trying to build. We aren't there yet. There's problems. But the act of reconciliation, the act of respecting all stories from all communities is a strength, not a liability for me.
So the world remembers the uniquely Canadian project, to be sure.
Thank you very much. I think so.
Getting back to the book, I want to talk about this. You devote 3 chapters to war women, the cheerleaders, the nurses, and the mothers. As you put it in the book, is war just a man's game? No, it has never really been that. It's just that many people have chosen to see it that way. How important was it for you to make sure these voices were heard?
Because again, their voices have been left out, right? There's a lot of histories, and now we're doing the histories of the nurses. Yeah, I can't be definitive here, but mostly it's about the men who fought, the men who came back, the men who commanded, the men who were the politicians, the men, and rightfully so. But in doing so, the women's stories were absented. And I don't think that's appropriate, because women were very involved with war. Most of in World War I, they weren't picking up guns, but they were cheering the war. They were taking care of the leftovers. They were healing. They were doing all of that. And they were receiving the veterans who came home with PTSD. And they were receiving the rapes. I mean, the rapes go on. So women are receivers of war in a very major way, and also the cheerleaders for war. So we don't want to get into too many simplistic gender things here. Men are the warlike gender and women are the peaceful gender. No. More complex than that. And I also wanted to say, wait a minute, these are these are the older women that I remember as a 10-year-old, and they're all sort of boring, right? Oh yeah, who's Margaret? That old lady Margaret. She's sort of boring, and she wears these weird shoes. Well, she was a World War I operating room nurse, and her experience in terms of dealing with the wreckage that landed up on the operating tables, how much blood, how many bones, how many amputations, how many guys, who had no testicles or no brain. All of that was part of her experience of war. So they have to be honored. They have to be recognized. So that's why a lot of the book is about women.
Well, what's next? What do you hope people get out of this book?
I want us to be cognizant of the stories that are being told, right? There's two wars going on right now, one in the Middle East and one in Ukraine, and be aware of the stories that are being told about it. Doesn't mean don't react, doesn't mean don't be compassionate, doesn't mean don't get irate at injustice, but be aware of the mechanism of the war stories coming at us, trying to shape us one way or the other. Because if we start to become aware of this storytelling about war, I think we will have a stronger perspective on doing the next one or not.
These letters are over 100 years old, yet the subject matter seems more resonant and relevant than ever today. Do you agree?
Yep. A friend of mine said war is in fact an ancient virus. It's been with our species since the very beginning, and we keep it alive with our imaginations. Meaning, if we stop feeding the virus with our stories and our imaginations about security, aggression, all the rest of it, the virus might actually not appear anymore. I'm waiting for us to be inoculated against it, and I don't know how you do that.
The name of the book is By the Ghost Light, Wars, Memories, and Families. It's available from Knopf Canada. My thanks to author R.H. Thomson.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate it.